Welcome to my studio. Thanks for dropping by. So it's been a little while since I've created any art and decided to keep up my skills by creating a little something. What better way than to put a couple of mediums together that is very common to use together, but I have not yet tried. So today I will be using a 2B graphite pencil, a 4B black charcoal pencil, and a white charcoal pencil on 140 pound or 300 GSM tone tanned mixed media paper. For blending, I use a combination of blending stump and paintbrush, as well as the use of an occasional Tombow mono eraser to bring out some of the mid-tones, especially with the hair and the flyaways. This video is jam-packed with a bunch of tips, so be sure to check them all out. I first began by creating part of the background. Since I am right-handed, I tend to work from the top to bottom, left to right, and back to front. Why? Well, the top to bottom, left to right is to keep from smudging the drawing as I work. I also place a piece of glassine paper under my hand to keep the oils from my hand off the paper, as well as keep from smudging any areas previously worked on. As far as the back to front, this is to help create the layering effect, and in this instance, to keep from creating halos around the subject. So completing the background first, I have no worry about smudging a crisp line of a subject, and in this instance, I'm able to soften the hair edges and add the flyaways needed for this piece. While I typically work in sections and complete as I go, because of the paper and working midtones first, I felt it was a better approach to block in the entire piece first. I used a paper tone for a base midtone and worked from that. I used a 2B pencil to block in the values that were darker than the base tone. Knowing the 2B pencil would only take me so far, I kept that in mind as I completed my darker midtones. I blended this out to create the smooth transitions and get rid of the harsh pencil marks. I then began with my black charcoal pencil layering in the darks. So why did I use charcoal instead of a softer graphite like 8B or 9B? Well, many people don't like the shine that the softer graphite gives in the finished piece. While I'm able to get my blacks black enough with those pencils, I wanted to give this technique a try and see how they work together. So I began layering in the charcoal to get my darks in and quickly realized that I was blending out too much, essentially bringing those darks back into a darker midtone. This happened because I did not have any of my light values in and found it difficult to really judge when to stop blending and how dark to leave those dark areas. Keep in mind that all values work together to create the depth and interest in your work. The wider range of value you can include in your drawing, the more depth and interest created in your piece. I took my white charcoal and roughly put in some of the lights to have something to better judge my value range as I was creating in my artwork. I of course will go back in and refine these lighter values, but for the purpose of judging my values, I just roughly put them in the areas needed. Because the charcoal being such a dark value, I used the charcoal that was on my blending stump already to tone some of the areas that I didn't want quite as dark as using the pencil directly, but still darker than the graphite. If you decide to use charcoal with graphite, one thing to keep in mind is once the graphite builds up a shine, it becomes slippery and makes it difficult for things like charcoal to stick to. If you want to add it in, I suggest doing it early or in a similar manner to this, where you use only a 2B and use your charcoal for all other darker areas in the drawing. This way, the two mediums will work together and not against each other and make for a more enjoyable experience. Something else that I discovered with this process is I put in some of the shading in my flower with the 2B pencil prior to putting the white charcoal on them. I found this to be very helpful to tone the petals without getting too muddy in appearance. Near the end, I then took my blending stump and refined those shadows just using the charcoal that was already on the stump. I did add charcoal pencil to the darker areas and was careful to not blend too much to avoid the gray mud, which was not the look I was going for. Another tip I have, Regardless of the medium you use, but especially with things like charcoal and pastel, it is a good idea to soften those top layers so you don't have harsh pencil lines on top. I am personally not a fan of that look and feel it takes away from the piece, unless that sketchy look is what you're going for. To soften these lines, just dab a couple of times with a blending stump, sponge, or even your finger. It doesn't have to be completely blended, just softened a bit to avoid those harsh lines. Also, when trying a new medium for the first time or combining mediums together for the first time, I recommend a small study prior to beginning so you, number one, understand how they will work together, and number two, see how to layer them to get the look you want. I considered just doing this piece in only charcoal, but after doing the study, I decided that the addition of graphite really added to the overall appearance and feel I wanted to achieve that would have been much more difficult to pull off with just the use of charcoal. The graphite added more of a vintage feel versus charcoal itself, so that was the deciding factor in going this route. Have you used charcoal and graphite together? What are your reasons, and do you have any tips? Share your experience and tips in the comments below. The Tombow Mono Eraser got its work out with the flyaways, as well as blending and softening the hair. Since it is already small, it is very easy to just use as is without much manipulation. I don't press very hard, as I don't want to flatten the tooth of the paper should I remove too much. It is better to go over the line a time or two with light pressure and remove the pigment in layers than to ruin your paper. Plus, if you are trying for more precise lines, this slow movement will allow that to happen. I also often run my blending stump over the newly erased line to blend it back a bit and make it appear as part of the piece and not just some random line that is out of place. Another tip when using any eraser really is to shape it or cut it to get the details you're looking for. Just because it is round or rectangle doesn't mean you can't change it to have a sharp point or edge. Experiment and see what works best for the piece you are doing. Also, a kneaded eraser can also be your best friend for lifting and molding into various shapes needed to complete your piece or fit into specific areas. Plus, they are just fun to play with. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and hitting the bell notification so you don't miss out on any future videos. I'm Wendy O'Brien. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep on arting.